Johnny Bouy, and Don Nichols. There's quite a few stories I could tell about Don Nichols, but he isn't here, so I won't talk about his back. I could say I could talk all night about Johnny as a fishing partner for me. Anytime that I needed a fishing partner anywhere in the United States, all I had to do was call Johnny. Johnny had been an airline pilot for United Airlines for years and years. He started flying for United Airlines when it didn't have no wheels tail. It was a drag. He finished up flying non-stop from Chicago to the Hawaiian Islands and the biggest plane that they have. So did Nichols. You were looking at a real spoonplugger and your boy. I call him a boy. He's my boy. Right there. Tom Coleman is an old acquaintance of mine. He's been a friend, a business partner, and also a legal advisor to some of my operations. But he's a spoonplugger. He developed the first spoonplugging club in the United States at Nashville, Tennessee. In his profile, or in a journal, is that what's called? Journal. He just finished his journal. As many of you people would like to see what went on in the very beginning and the formation of the club and all the other things, you can look into Tom's journal. He has been a fishing partner for me also. Tom is one of those fellows that maybe I don't know exactly how to put this because it might will make him mad. The reason for going fishing is to catch fish and a personal satisfaction. As far as I'm concerned, that's all it is to the game. Tom, when he started out, he was fishing Kentucky Lake and some of the others, and for his own personal way in fishing the wide floodplain type reservoir, he wound up with fishing with several rods, trolling with several rods. I never advised anyone to just fish with several rods, and in his case, it was very special. And he developed multiple fishing rods, trolling rods, and a wide floodplain type reservoir, which had long straight stretches so he didn't have to have too much maneuver. Now, guess what he said to me? Why, Tom, how are you running all these different rods? He said, well, I catch one and I keep going. If I catch two, I know they're there. And sometimes in his journal you'll see that he's running 4 rods, and he says, I don't know whether they're there, but so he doesn't stop trolling until he gets 4 fish. Now, so I asked him this, I said, Tom, some of you people please might close your ears on this. I'm not being nasty, that's just the way I say it. I said, Tom, you're a half-ass spoonplugger. And he said, why? I said, you don't cast. But let me tell you, I wouldn't change him for the world. He is happy, he's getting fish, and what else do we want in life? I can tell some other tales about Tom, but I won't at this time. Tommy, they're going to have a chance to say something else. So, Terry, let's come to Terry. I ran into Terry in 1957 in the Chicago area. I finished up with Tom, and by the way, I had a little film, if you want to see it, about that, about when we finished up our work, and he went into something else. I will not tell why he went into something else, but maybe I will at that. He was a great teacher. He's one of the best mappers I ever saw. hurt his back. And then the next time he saw him on the way, he was doing something entirely different. This has happened so long that a lot of guys got a pet. It was a perfect reason for them to stop beside that, but that was one of them. I went on all this up in my own estimation. In the early years and down through the ages, so to speak, I was the only stupid jerk to keep at it. Because it's a very disheartening thing. It's a kind of different today. Where now we got some apostles out there. So as far as Terry is concerned, he was the greatest admirer that I had at that time. And he's still a great and a teacher. I can tell some tales about him. And I'm tempted to do it. But I won't until I ask some of these guys to do a little yakking too. But to start it off, I'll say something about Terry. You guys want me to stop, shut up? Okay. But they can have some terrible tales to tell you about the early years and their experiences. I'm not going to tell them what to say or not. But I can tell a few tales about these guys. Johnny Bouy and John Nichols were fishing a lake in the chain of lakes near Chicago. I was in another boat, and they were doing some trolling in back in a particular lake. And here came a skier, or a guy in a big boat, and came by and cut Johnny's goat wire and cut John Nichols' wire off. I wondered what these two guys were going to do. Johnny was running the boat. I saw them pick off as fast as they could after that boat. That boat went to the dock. I saw Johnny and Don come up the dock and park the boat and walk up on the dock. After quite a while, they came back out and came to it. And I said, "Guys, what did you do?" Guess what? They big boy. Don was a national champion wrestler. This guy looked like a giant out there. And no fools, strong man. And they said, "Oh, nothing. We just made him pay for everything that was on our rods." Remember that? I forgot. And another one was that Johnny and I used to fish quite a lot. And I'll never will forget that Johnny was flying out. Did you fly in my plane, I think, or your plane? I don't remember which. And we were fishing down in Mississippi. And we landed behind the airport, behind the dam, and went fishing. And when we came back and started up the highway, we hit a bad storm. Well, Johnny was flying the plane, the light plane, and I'll never will forget. He landed that plane in that storm in Memphis. It took me about 2 hours to unclench my hands, but he put her down, boy, in that case. I remember that key, let me tell you, I just sat down on the doctor on my stomach, and I make a list of the stories of these three guys. We don't have time to tell them. I looked at my list, and there was 49 stories. Guess what? I came over here and thought I left them at home. You guys are laughing, but you wouldn't be laughing if I wrote that list over. I can just go on and Terry, let me tell you about Terry a little bit. Tom, I love you, boy, but I ain't gonna tell some of those nasty tales about you. I could talk all night about Terry, some of the experiences that he He was traveling the country with me from this car all the way to California. One of the stories that I'm going to tell, maybe a couple. We were mapping a lake called Kachuma. It was just northeast or west of San Francisco. And we're doing a good job of this thing. And two things happened on this particular lake of Terry. The first one I'll tell you about. We were mapping and drawing. He can map and draw a lake better than anything you've ever seen. And in this one particular area, he had a good bar, and he was mapped it, and then he took his line sights. And one of his line sights, and by the way, I'm going to talk about line sights tomorrow afternoon. One of the line sights was a bush or something down on next to the shore, and up on the hill to a nice little shack. And he made that line sight there. Then he made another line sight over this way to locate that particular hut. He did this about all over the lake. It was quite a huge lake. Later, I got in the boat with him, and he was showing me all these things and the structure that was there. And he came up to this structure that happened to be a bar, bar. And he lined up his line side here with that little building up there. So we got busy and looked around out here, and there wasn't no bar there. And so what happened here? So we checked his line sides again and went all over this thing, and we couldn't find it. We finally found a solution why we couldn't find a bar. That little building up there was a charm, and they had moved it. I'm not going to let up on me yet. I'm going to give them a chance for a rebuttal here in just a minute. I don't want to get mine out of my hair right now. So in that same way, we were working, and I went in one direction, and Terry went in another direction. And pretty soon he came back, and he had gotten a ticket for getting in a restricted area. These barrels were way over there, and here came a young guy with a 45 on his hip and was checking and gave Terry a ticket for being in a restricted area. And the barrels were half a mile away. So Terry asked me what would we do about it. Well, you know me, and I'm pretty much a rebel. I said, tear it up. And Terry said, well, he told me that if he didn't come in at that particular time, they'd send a man in Chicago to pick him up. Now, from now on, I'm going to tell you about his plans. He had a great big fishing parlor that we called Tiny. Huge man. Strong. He could lift this building, I believe. And he made this plan that came after. Let me go back. He came from the Marines. He was raised in a industrial area of Chicago. So if they came and knocked this guy, they sent a representative, a cop from California, to this particular house to serve papers on him and to get him extradited back to California. So his plan was this. He put Tiny over in another room right there close to his place. And his wife was planned this way. She would invite this guy into the room, into the house. Then she would immediately rip off part of her clothes and holler rape. And you know what that Tiny could do for that guy. But darn it, he never did show it. this time, it reminded me of this just then. They were fishing up in the Jingle Lakes, and I was in the boat with them. And they knew that there was a little young fella with a badge and a 45 running around over the lake and said, "We've got to inspect your cushions." And he was giving the fisherman a fit. Just miserable, coming around trying to spout his authority, so to speak. So he came around and stopped Terry and Tiny and said, "Let me see your cushion." And Tiny said, "Oh no, we're not going to show you a cushion." He said, "Oh yes, I am." You know what Tiny told him? "You touch that cushion and I'll drown you right here." He took off. You see, it's a good thing I left my 49 stories at home. And I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to give these guys a chance to rebuttal of what they want to do. Now, if I don't like it, I'm going to come back up here. I'll have to pass this instrument around, and when anybody's talking as a Bouy, I'll start off with I'm going to let Tom Coleman say it. Now, Tom, you're a long-winded, you're a lawyer. We don't hear a bedtime story. Friend, partner, Susan, say something, but don't be too long-winded.
You know, if I ever had any doubts that I was a spoonplugger, I found out one cold day when my motor stopped on Kentucky Lake. I wasn't too far from the ramp, you know, but I was a heavy current pushing me back and wind was coming toward me. And this fella stopped and asked me if I'd like a tow job. So I said, "Yes, sir." And then I noticed, you know, that he was one of those trotline fishermen on Kentucky Lake. So I was real quiet, and he started pulling my boat up toward that ramp. Then suddenly, he kept looking at me, and finally he cut his motor, and he said, "You're one of those spoonpluggers, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, goodbye." So I knew I was a spoonplugger, man. I don't need to talk too long, you know, I'm hungry. Shall I pass it to,
Yeah.
I'm glad to pass it to Johnny.
No, that's not good.
Well, I'm going to get Terry off the hook. He's not the only one that lost his marker. We were on a very important fishing trip in Chicago. Tom Nally in the Tribune had written a lot of stories about Buck, and the Tribune had gotten lots of letters complaining about promoting Buck's spoonplug. So they sent Tom Nally's boss, the sports editor of the Chicago Tribune, to go out fishing with Buck and see if this was all true. So we started out about 5 in the morning. Buck was in the boat with the sports editor. I was in the boat with Buck's son and somebody else, the chief of police of Fox Lake, Illinois. And Don was in another boat. I can't for the life of me remember who he had in the boat. We fished till noon with Stacky. We hadn't caught a fish. We moved over to Lake Marie, and we couldn't find a fish on all our favorite spots. And this is going to be about the middle of the afternoon, and I know how Buck feels because this whole promotion in Chicago depends on whether he finds a fish or not. he moved over in a section of Lake Bouy that we'd never fished. And the next thing we knew, he found some fish. So Don and his boat and me and my boat moved over where Buck was. We're going to anchor our boats and cast these fish. And Buck says, "Now here's the line." And he checks this one line, he looks over, and his chin dropped down. He'd lined up a man and his wife anchored in a boat with a shoreline mark. And they hadn't caught any fish, so they up anchor and left. And there's Buck. He's got one mark, but he doesn't have the other. And so Don and I lined up, we started casting and moving over. I was the lucky guy, anchored right on the right spot, hit the fish. We saved his neck.
Now let me tell you something about this fellow. I had fished with Tom and Allie of the Chicago Tribune, and I kind of shook them up. I wouldn't tell you the story of how all was involved in this thing. Tom had just come from a Baltimore Sun, and he didn't know anything about the fishing in that area. So I took Tom fishing out in the chain of lakes. And he wrote a story that kind of shook up Chicago. But it also shook up his bosses. And Tom's boss what was his name? Anyway, that was a long time ago. But his boss gave Tom a lot, and she said, "Tom, we got a lot of static on that story. They people don't believe that they caught the fish out there." And I took a little maneuver, but I said, "Well, you're getting static from your boss. Now, the only thing we can do is take your boss fishing." So I got in that day to go fishing. I made a little preliminary arrangements with a couple of Spoonpluggers. Johnny was one of them. Who was the other? Reed? Reed was one of them. He was in the rough, but there was three of you.
Oh, Red.
Who?
Red, police chief of Fox Lake.
Yeah, police chief. All this was, so here's what I told those three guys. This Reed was my young son. He just, I don't know, he was a teenager. Not quite a teenager, I don't believe. And I said, "Now, what I'm going to do with Tom's boss, when I locate fish, you three guys, keep me in sight. And when I locate the fish, and I'll just give you the high sign, and I want you guys to move in to an anchor position and prearrange that you would anchor right there." So when I hit the fish, I caught pretty nice fish. They were good fish, weren't they? And they got the high sign, and I anchored, and I think I might have caught one before they got there, but they got in position. Come on, boy, come on. Now, what it was, there was 5 people casting at this thing, at this fish where I located. 5. And I remember one time, one very big thing, every time my son would catch one, you could hear his yellow rail about 5 miles. We kept those fish coming. I believe the total was 45, wasn't it? 45. The end of this story is pretty good. His boss went back to the Chicago Tribune. He called Tom McNally and says, "Tom, you can print any damn thing you want from here on out." That happened. Just like that. With the help of this this fellow right here. He had them coming so fast, it's unbelievable. Those fish.
I'm going to have to stand up to tell a couple of stories. You see great catches and hear about the great catches, but sometimes some things happen along the way, and Buck Perry has caught in some pretty unlikely situations. And fortunately, I happened to be with him a couple of times.
Now, wait a minute, I got another.
One time on the St. John's River, I said, Buck, these storms have been coming in pretty fast. And he says, we still have time. I says, okay, Buck. He says, the tide was out. And so we were able to get under a pier just before this torrential rainstorm hit. I spent 3 hours with this man under the pier, holding on to the pier. And I said, Buck, I told you that storm was coming. He says, just shush up and hang on to your end of the boat. That's what he said. Buck Perry was caught underneath the pier in a storm, and he stayed there for 3 hours. Remember that? Another time, we were together on Lake Apopka, and it was a great catch made that night. Thanks to Buck. Okay, I'm sure he's going to tell his story, so I'm not going to tell the beginning of it, but he made my partner and I look pretty foolish, and we learned a great spoon-plugging lesson that night from the master himself. But the funny part about it was, just before we located the fish, just before I made a cast and got the first one, he said, boys, they're here. I know they're here. I tell you, they're here. I looked at him. My partner Vic was in the next boat with her, and he said, Buck, you're scaring me again. You're scaring me. And last but not least was on Lake Apopka. Buck and I were out there together. We were checking this area out a little further from where we had been catching the fish. And Buck hooked this big bass. Now, in those days, we didn't have these nice little cameras. We had this great big 35 millimeter thing. You had to cover it up when it was raining. And it was a real wrestling match. You had to find somewhere to put it in the boat. And we were usually in a little 14-foot boat. So anytime you hooked a big bass, you made sure you had the camera on. You had to pull on him and make him jump. You'd get a great shot of him, but that was the last you'd see of him most of the time, you know. So he's got this big bass hooked, and he says, get the camera. I says, okay, I'll get the camera. I said, but we want this fish. Don't mess him up. I'll get the camera, but don't. He says, I'm going to get him now. And the fish wouldn't jump, as I remember. The fish wouldn't jump. So here's Buck Perry, our leader, fumbling around with the net, and he's got the net tangled in the oar lock and everything else. And I'm supposed to get the camera. I said, that's it. I put the camera down, he says, okay, shoot, are you shooting? I says, yes, sir, I'm shooting. With that, I just got that big bass right in the net. I took it about 11 1/4 pounds. He was only mad at me for a few moments, okay? I could always tell, he looked at me over the top of his glasses like that, you know? But I wanted to say this to you with that from all of us. Thank you so very, very much for everything.
Thank you. While he was talking, I remember a couple of good ones. But I'm not going to do it, it's getting a little late. I'm talking more, but any of you fellows want to come around and hear us breathe off of the past, and we'll try to keep our stories in line with the truth. If you like to, if you have time, you folks don't want to leave, I kind of, what you want?
Talk some more.
What you want me to do?
Talk some more. Let the boys talk some more.
Okay, we'll talk some more. few guys that since we've been yakking, I thought of some other little tale that you'd like to talk about. Here's the mic.
Old Spooner went to Kentucky Lake, and he was busy putting up his tent, and he happened to see some other people, two other fellows putting up their tent. So he went over and he tried to get a printing with them. And one of them went wham and hit him right up the side of the head and said, "Karate from Korea." Well, old Spooner struggled back to his feet, and the other fellow went wham, and he said, "Jiu-jitsu from Japan." This time, old Spooner wasn't able to get back up, and so he crawled over to the back of his pickup truck and pulled himself up on the tailgate, and he reached his arm back into the pickup truck until his hands fell on just what he put. And then he walked over, and he went wham, wham, tattoo from Tennessee. I can tell you another one, this is one that you might have some reactions to, so kind of got your emotions. This man and his wife, they've been fishing together for some years. And they had such a wonderful time on the water. But one night, when they were sitting in the den, she said, "Honey, if I should die and you should remarry, do you suppose that the new wife would use our house and my car?" And the husband thought for a moment and he said, "Yes, I expect so. You know your insurance would pay for it." Then she said, "Well, how about our boat? Would she ride in there and use it too?" And he thought for a moment and he said, "Well, I guess, I'm sure she would, because you know your insurance would have paid for it." And then she thought and she said, "Well, how about something as personal as my fishing rod? Would she use it?" And he said, "No way." And then she said, "Well, you just got through telling me that she'd use the house, she'd use the car, and she'd use the boat. Now, why wouldn't she use my fishing rod?" He said, "That's easy. She's left-handed."
I'll just have to say something else. Especially the one about the wife and the left-handed. One time, Jerry and I were trolling, and we hit a fish. I put one in the boat, and I dropped the anchor. I knew just about where it was. And so I started casting, and I had about 3 fish, and about this time, she had her casting rod rigged up. And she made the cast, made a perfect cast, right into the school. The lure, the line, the rod, the reel. I had another one that kind of messed up that I want to tell about Terry. So he worked out there, and by the time he gets through, maybe I'll remember it, because what he said might make me remind that one. So that was a good one. I wish I had brought that list along.
What And he said, I want you to fish Apopka and nowhere else. They've got some problems down there, and let's see if we can't find some fish. We were doing a promotion in Florida at the time, and Lake Apopka would have been, it would have been a big boom for us. It would have really kicked things off. So Vic and I went down there, and the condition of Lake Apopka was pretty bad. The orange groves would pull the water in to irrigate the fields, and they pump it right back in with no dikes or anything. And the muck on the bottom was in 3 feet of water. The muck was like 1.5 feet high. When you ran your motor through there, you could see the muck coming off. You troll a lure, you couldn't go too far without having to stop, reel in, and take the muck off the lure. Just a terrible situation. It's a big lake, several miles across, several miles wide. It's round, it's windy. When we were down there, it was about 105 degrees. And I'm not making excuses, I'm just telling you what kind of a lake it was. It was about 8 or 9 feet deep. Just a big lake, just a big bowl-shaped dishpan type lake. No weed line, no nothing. And so Vic and I spent about a day and a half out there. And we just about had it. We couldn't see how anything could even live in there outside of rough fish. So we proceeded to go to some nice lakes across the road. And they were full of bass. You could catch 100 a day without any problem. So I had to go back that night. And I told him, I said, we found some fish in some lakes right across the way. He says, that's not what I told you to do. Okay? He says, I'll be down there and I'll meet you down there. So he came down the following evening, and then we went out and Lake Apopka again. And we got a big head start. And this is a spoon-plugging lesson for everyone in this room. As we fished throughout the day, and it got hotter and hotter and hotter, and the heat was getting all of us. Vic went one way in his boat, and Buck and I fished together. We didn't have a strike. We didn't see the fish.
I don't want to run it off you, but we went back on that thing and I made this statement. Boys, I want to teach you a lesson.
That's exactly what he said. So Vic went up a certain area called the Guard Neck, and Buck and I stayed in the main lake. And boy, I just about had it with that place about that time. And Vic was we had a predetermined place to meet, and Buck and I were there on the pier. Buck was anxiously waiting for Vic to come back. And Vic comes back, he pulls up to the pier, and Buck says, how'd you do? So Vic says, nothing, Buck, just one small bass, about 10 inches long, 11 inches long. And he says, where'd you catch that fish? Well, I could have strangled Vic. I thought, we're going to be out there 2 more weeks looking for the next one, you know. So, because we would fish from dawn till dark if need be to find them, okay? So, with that, Buck he took us down the Guard Neck. He took us into this area. We controlled that area a little bit better. We caught another small fish on a 500. He told us that we're going to work the area casting. We're having trouble presenting our lures to the fish, casting spoon plugging, anything that would bump the bottom because of this muck. At that time, Buck had a special jump type lure that he made. Probably don't want me to say anything about that or ain't going to make him again. Called an SJ, and it was the best jump type lure ever made. And we put a bass strip on our pork rind to give it some snack, give it a little bit more speed because the water was awful warm. We knew if we hit these fish that shallow, that we'd have to have some fast speed with this jump type, but we could just drag it along the bottom. We found these fish in a very unique spot, and this was the night when he said, I know they're here. I'm telling you, I know they're here. Well, once the first one was caught, that first night, I remember the numbers. It was 53 bass later between the 3 of us. We had them coming 2 at a time, we had them coming 3 at a time, except Buck was on the camera. And then he got into it too, and we did have them coming 3 at a time. The next morning was 80-something more. Okay, and just an unbelievable string of bass that were anywhere from 3.5 pounds to just under 10 pounds. But a lot of fish, over 6, 7, 8 pounds, a lot, some over 9. It was, I think they said it was a record catch ever. They'd never seen anything like it. And actually, we had the right people with us the second day. We had one more Jacksonville Outdoor, Jacksonville Journal, I believe, and then Charlie Williams from the Chamber of Commerce, and several other people of note, and we had all resort homes out there and that, but it was a unique situation under which these fish were caught. And Buck will tell you about that in another story, what this situation was, but the point I'm making here is to never, ever give up. We gave up. Buck Perry taught us a spoon-plugging lesson.
Well, some of you, I'm not going to say too much about that, but that wasn't the end of the story. We went up there to give a seminar after this in Jacksonville. And before we went on, we had a whole crowd of people because this thing had hit the papers. And when we went up to the seminar, they said, well, we have two gentlemen from Tallahassee who represents the biology department. And one of the things that the reason we went down there, and I told the guys that drove down there in this particular lake, it came out a big report in the papers that the biologists had worked on this lake and had come to the conclusion due to the muck and also they were manufacturing muck out of this lake and had juice factories up on the hill. And all the residues from these orange juices and these things were poured into this lake. And it looked like orange juice. One of the statements I heard him later say, I ain't gonna fish nothing but those that look like orange juice. I heard him say that. So Jerry and Dick and I were giving this seminar in Jacksonville. And they asked me if we have two gentlemen from the state that wanted to make a little announcement before you make your presentation. I said, okay. And so it turned out to be two biologists that Dr. Fry and Tallahassee had sent over there after this report. And they said that they had got up there and said we had made a survey of that lake and we found that there wasn't no bass in there, that it was only brimble and all that mudfish and also another old long-billed fish. But all of it was left with those two species which were not game fish. And they were telling this August that story and we had heard that some fellows had come in and were claiming that they caught all these fish and put the reports in the paper. And that's all we want to say. So then I put on my program. Now, just so that I told these boys I was going to bring down a guy from the TV station and also the newspaper. And we had him down there and we photographed it. Between me and Terry, we photographed this fishing experience and we got both of these guys in the film. Well, before we got for the film and these dignitaries started coming on in this film, I saw those two guys get up in the dark and leave the building. The next morning, about 9 o'clock, the phone rings, and I answered the phone, and they said, we're calling from Tallahassee. My name is Dr. Fry. I am the head of the Game and Fish in the state of Florida. We'd like for you to come over to Tallahassee and have a talk. Well, I said I'd be over in 2 or 3 days. This is talk time. Well, I had been approached in Minnesota to leave the state because we kept too many fish. In this case, didn't know what to expect because it looked like someone was a liar in this instance. But I wasn't scared because I knew my situation was okay. I had my witnesses, I had my fishermen, I had the fish, I had everything. So I went on over there. It was either one or two things we were going to have. They either were going to run me out of state or attempt to run me out of state. I used the word attempt. Or they wanted to make a proposition. It had to be one of the two. So I made my response in my mind before I even got there. And when I got there, here were the 5 district commissioners of the state of Florida. Florida is broken up into 5 districts. And the 5 commissioners of those districts were sitting in the room when I walked in with Dr. Fry, who was the head of it. Well, this kind of surprised me. Well, there was a whole little friendly chatting going on, and pretty soon Dr. Fry said, well, let's get this show on the road. So we all sat down, and everything got quiet again. I was just sitting there waiting. Dr. Fry was kind of looking at his other guys, and my eyes would go down, and then he'd come over to me, and his eyes would drift away. And finally he came over to his eyes and looked at me, and he said, "Look, how much?" Guess what my reply was? I said, "Dr. Fry, $746,000. I will give you a 4-year program. I will map every lake in each one of these districts. We will produce a map. I'll put schools in each one of those districts. And when we get through, Florida will know what they have as far as the fishing situation." Guess what happened? They jumped up and started arguing about who was going to get it first. Now, one of them got a little smart and said to Dr. Fry, "Where are we going to get the money? It's not in the budget." Well, it's just so happened that I thought about this thing a little bit. And I said, why don't you make everybody have a fishing license? Don't let just certain classes of people get free and don't have to have a fishing license. They said, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? And they said, yeah. So they started a program through the legislature to have everybody have a fishing license. Certain organizations at Miami and Jacksonville raised up their hands and scrawled, "This is not fair," etc., 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 etc. It shot the whole program.